Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Pública. This is the second episode of the series about Gandhi. In the previous episode, I analyzed some of the chapters of his book Hinswara or Indian Home Rule, published in 1908, in which he explains some of the ideas towards which the Indian people had to pursue in order to get the independence, but a real one, not this kind of the colonization process in which the colonizer is defeated, but later on a new kind of elites take part of the country. Gandhi advised highly about that, and in this second episode I will continue analyzing his book because there are like 20 chapters. The chapter number 6 is civilization. I think is one of the most interesting. He points how the work of defenders of modern civilization is to hypnotize us, and we are drawn into the vortex, as he mentioned. When he points to modern civilization, as I mentioned in the previous episode, he refers to the Western idea of progress, of creating machines which are polluting the environment, oppressing the people, the creation of armies, weapons to destroy other areas, to conquer different nations, and so on. It is not Gandhi was against all kind of machinery, although in the 19th chapter he kind of analyzes some ideas behind it and how it would be better to go to the kind of local village area. Later on in his life, he changed this mind in this approach and points that there are kind of machinery that can be useful for attain our means, such as using the car, the transport to travel by miles, the use of medicine, and so on. However, he also points how this kind of city life with many cars around that, the levels of pollution are making people unhealthy, and he wrote that in 1908. Although in later edition he changed some of his ideas, and in fact in the preface for the edition, I think it's 1938, 30 years later, he pointed that he has changed opinion many times because he's always constantly looking for truth. And I think this is a very interesting idea of Gandhi, the fact that we cannot stick with our opinions for all our life. It is a sign of maturity to form different opinions, shape our reality with the perception that we see around us, and henceforth it is important to form different ideas, as ideally we will be talking with different kind of people in the development of our life. So civilization for Gandhi is this idea of advanced technologies that had been implemented in Europe and had spread across the world. For instance, he mentioned that working in factories or mines is much worse than the previous lifestyle, working in the open air, in the fields, and so on, because even though this life was also hard, so it was difficult to attain, at least you will be being close to nature, listening to the wind, taking the sun, and so on. So for him, the problem of modern civilization is that, quote, workers are enslaved by temptation of money and of the luxuries that money can buy. Gandhi, obviously, he was an anti-capitalist, and precisely for that reason, he always said that money is the evil which corrupts any kind of human. And when he refers to the colonizers, the British, he points that these guys deep down they have a good soul. However, it is the money that is creating a mist upon themselves, and they cannot see what is beyond that kind of blurry atmosphere. For example, he points how capitalism has changed the habit of the people. Here he says that formerly people used to have 2 or 3 meals per day consisting of home bread and vegetables. And in that sense, Gandhi, as a vegetarian, obviously denounced the factory farm and the mutilation of non-human animals to serve as human diet. However, I am not so convinced about the idealization of the previous era in which people used to eat 2 or 3 times per day, because obviously if you are laboring for many hours, you surely will need a huge amount of calories, and with 2 or 3 meals just based on vegetables and bread, I'm not sure that you can take enough energy to carry on with your life, and perhaps those people will be on risk on taking ill, living less years, and so on. And I am saying so even though I am vegan person, but still it must be realistic. So Gandhi, I think this is one of the weakest point in his book, that sometimes he seems to idealize the life previously to modern civilization. And even though I am against kind of polluting technologies that are destroying our environment, I think that kind of balance should be attained. In addition, for him, capitalism, it is not a kind of material change in our life, but also the morality that is often thought in the name of morality, as he mentioned. He points how in Europe, due to the frenzy lifestyle that we are experiencing in our current times, and he was writing in 1908, point that, quote, people can hardly be happy in solitude. This is very interesting because Foucault, in one of his books, mentioned that in the Eastern world, like in the Asian culture, the idea of being in silence is much more accepted than in the West. For Gandhi, this idea is related with the fast environment experience within the cities that make people more altered in their kind of nervous system, and henceforth they feel themselves the need to fill up the vacuum that can create the silence. It can be awkward in the West, same as when we go with our neighbors in the elevator and we don't know what to talk about, tend to start a chat about the weather and so on. But for Foucault and Gandhi, in the Eastern world, there is not this problem, because silence is respected, is seen as kind of sign of intelligence, that people do not need to keep talking all the time, but sometimes it's good just to listen the surroundings, to meditate and enjoy with the breeze of the air, the gaze of the fields, or the touch of the seawater. Gandhi, criticizing civilization, points that the English are enterprising and industrious, which for him is a good quality, but considering that he's a critical of industry and capitalism, I believe that this book was written also in the context that he wanted to appeal to the British in order to obtain the independence, and henceforth he felt probably obliged to kind of remark the British qualities according to him. For that reason, he was not against First World War, even though he was a pacifist, because he did not want to alienate the English people and wanted to use the global conflict as a kind of juncture in order to demand the Indian home rule at that time. And interestingly, in this chapter, he points how, quote, Hinduism called the modern civilization of Europe the Black Age. So whereas in Europe we call the Dark Age this period of 1000 years in which religion was imposed in the whole continent after the fall of the Roman Empire, in which there was no intellectual creativity. So roughly from the fall of the Roman Empire, the kind of extension of Christianism as the hegemonic religion until the Renaissance in Florence, those 1000 years are considered as one of the less productive in the kind of arts, culture, and other different fields in Europe. Those are the Dark Age for us, but for Gandhi, it is modern civilization that is called the Black Age. This is, I think, found it very interesting, the different perspective within part of the words about different currents of thoughts. In another chapter, he pointed the reason why was India lost, and he mentioned that the English have not taken India. We have given it to them. He blamed on everybody, especially the elites, because in the 18th century, in order to conquer territories from others and impose themselves under other Indian elites, they seek the support of the British. And they trade with weapons until eventually the British conquered India and it became a colonized. He mentioned, quote, "It is truer to say that we gave India to the English than that India was lost." And he mentioned how the British people, in establishing a colonial regime all over the world, mentioned that it was their idea to establish trade with different countries. And he quotes Napoleon, which apparently said, apparently Napoleon Bonaparte described the English as a nation of shopkeepers, and Gandhi, relating with that, mentioned how, quote, "money is their god. They wish to convert the whole world into a vast market for the good." In that sense, in the name of commerce, according to Gandhi, the British Empire was able to expand their territories, oppress millions of people over the planet, and become the hegemonic power in the 19th and first half of the 20th century. So Gandhi is asking himself, how can India become free? In that sense, he points how in India, those alone who have been affected by Western civilization have become enslaved. In other words, it is the Swaraj, the Indian home rule, that will happen when we learn to rule ourselves. Such Swaraj for him has to be experienced by each one for himself. In that sense, he doesn't just support to overthrow the British. He mentioned, quote, "If the English become Indianized, we can accommodate them," end quote. In other words, it is not an idea of creating a national movement just to overthrow the foreigners, but rather the Swaraj must be something accomplished for each of the people and put in combination with everyone. So becoming free means to liberate your body and your mind. In that sense, body and mind being one together will be fundamental for create a new kind of human. In that sense, it is important for him that every Indian person refuse not the English as so, but the English system imposed in India. Same as if the Indian rule in a similar vein as the English, they will be overthrown and refused by the rest. He, showing a deep knowledge of the world politics in his ages, established a comparison between India and Italy. He pointed how Italy failed, even though his movement for independence was huge. You had Mazzini, you have Garibaldi, the two main figures in the 19th century that advocate for a kind of unification of Italy from north to south. And he pointed how Mazzini wanted that Italy was the people, and point how Italy at the end did not become free because eventually Mazzini and Garibaldi were betrayed by Cavour, the ministry, and also the King Emmanuel, and eventually the power was given to the Italian elites. He mentioned, relating Italian case with the Indian, how, quote, "My patriotism does not teach me that I am to allow people to be crushed under the heel of Indian prince if only the English retire." As he said, patriotism is the welfare of the whole people, same as Mazzini said, or Garibaldi, or now Gandhi is saying. For that reason, he refused to weaponize his country, saying that to arm India on a large scale is to Europeanize it. Henceforth, Gandhi here is advocating for non-violence. In other words, as he points, quote, "Those who are intoxicated by the grudge modern civilization think these kind of things, that is important, essential to use violence to free the nation. But as Gandhi points, what is granted under fear can be retained only so long as the fear lasts." In other words, it is fundamental to change the habits of the people, educate everybody, to show each of one the road to be taken in order to establish a society of cooperation and living under a peaceful regime, not just taking out the colonizer to impose new elites that will be oppressing the people, same as the former masters of the country. For that sense, it is important to understand former kind of historical movement of independence, as Gandhi is doing in his book, like the one in Italy, which, even though had all the components to establish a free country, with the army of Garibaldi going from south and Mazzini having his legitimation, rationalization of a proper independent movement carried by the people, eventually it was the elites led by Cavour and Emmanuel who ended leading the country and establishing a system in which people were crushed. For that, Gandhi refusing the use of brute force point how for him is very important the connection between the means and the ends. He explains how the English obtained the right to vote by force in 1833, and because they used force to obtain the vote, they did not obtain real rights. And he gives a lot of examples about the stealing, like if you want to have a watch, you can steal the watch for your neighbor, you can buy it for him, or maybe he can give it to you as a gift. And this different kind of process will establish different outcomes. Even though at the end you will have the watch in all of them, it is the process how you have received the watch that will change your life. So if you have still the watch for your neighbor, probably your neighbor will want revenge, and it will create a kind of circle of conflict, never-ending conflict. Also, if you buy for your neighbor, you will have the watch, but you will have lost money, and perhaps you need that in order to buy some means. Finally, if you receive a gift, this kind of create a bond between the neighbor and yourself or your friend or whatever. And this kind of friendship is what creates love, which for Gandhi is the most important force in the human community. In fact, he used the idea of soul force, refuse physical force, and embrace soul force, the force of the love, as the anarchists always theorize in order to expand an ideal of solidarity, cooperation, and mutual aid toward the community. Fair news alone can produce fair results. As with the example of the watch, there are 3 different results from 3 different means. And just to finish with the episode today, and I think I will do another of Gandhi because there is much more to analyze, especially the chapter of passive resistance. He mentions that, quote, "The force of love and pity is infinitely greater than the force of arms." And here in his thought, love force, the soul force, is the equal of passive resistance.